Hi guys, so this is the final podcast in our first series. So this podcast we kind of called it a bit of a Q&A. We did a bit more jargon busting, we've talked a lot about language on this, but I think it's really important, but we kind of come back to it on this one. And we were kind of looking at a few things, what we mean by a few words and explaining it a little bit more. So we talked about validation, dysregulation, we talked about transitions. We spoke about the difference between rules and boundaries. Just wanted to say thank you very much for everyone who's listened so far. I just had a little quick check on the charts. I kind of didn't even think to look at it before now. Apparently, we're 16th in the non-profit chart on iTunes or Apple Music or whatever it is now, which is really cool. So yeah. If you have liked it, if you have enjoyed it, please, get in touch. Let us know what you think. Let us know as well what you'd like to hear more of, what you'd like to hear us discussing, or who you'd like us to talk to in the next series, because we're going to start thinking about doing that quite soon. Also, if you're listening to this and you enjoy the podcast, you might want to think about sharing the podcast on your socials or whatever, because it's really worth remembering that this is a very, in many ways, hidden problem. A lot of times people won't come forward and talk about it. We've spoken about in the previous episodes. People don't really know what it is that's going on. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness with these podcasts as well. So if you put it up on your socials or whatever it might be, put a link to it, you might help someone who listens to it and goes, oh my word, yeah, that's what's happening for me, and that's a big part of what we're trying to do with this. So if you have enjoyed it, yeah, maybe consider doing that, because you don't know how it might help someone or who it might help. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the series. And we'll see you next time. All right, take care. Hello and welcome to the Capa podcast. My name's Matt, and I'm joined again by Helen Bonnick and Jane Griffiths. How you doing, guys?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Helen.
Hi there. Good to be here. Yeah, good to speak to you both.
Nice. So, guys, it's the sixth one of these we're recording, and this is going to be, I think, the last in this batch of the first run of these podcasts.
Series 1 is going to be done and dusted.
That's it, yeah. And it was as simple as that.
Do we need to leave a cliffhanger at the end of this series?
Yeah.
I think so. We have to. Yeah.
Well,
so
definitely.
We'll be thinking of that throughout the recording. So today, guys, we're going to be looking at some of the sort of our frequently asked questions. So some of the things that come up when we're talking with parents, some of the questions we get asked, emailed into us. Also, we ran one of our parent forums the other night, and we got some questions there as well. So we thought it'd be quite good to have a chat about those questions and give a bit of feedback.
Yeah, we thought it'd be really helpful. We, over the, lots of years, dare I say it, of doing this, there's some kind of frequently asked questions that we often get. But also thinking, what are the themes that come up for parents and professionals, to be fair, that we thought might be helpful to. Can I just say, it's not our last podcast, Matt. It's just our last one of the series.
Of course, yes. Not the last podcast.
Hate for people to think this is the last one.
Never doing this ever again. I feel like we're just getting in the groove of it now. I can't wait for series 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Jane, what are some of the things that you find coming up quite a bit? Some of the frequently asked questions that you get?
I think I would really like to start with the language that we use, because it takes us right back to, our first episode when we spoke about language and terminology. And, I think it's very fair that parents talk to us about the language that we can use when we do, as a professional and other professionals that they work with or are supported by. sometimes the language we can use can be a bit of a shorthand. It can be full of acronyms. I remember, Helen, you spoke about that one of the podcasts we did recently, and how that can be a bit frustrating because we say some of the things that we talk about, we can say it. I don't want to say glibly because I never feel like it's a glib comment, but I think we can say words without thinking about it. And the first one I'm thinking about is validation.
Right.
We've used it a lot, but what do we really think and what does it actually mean?
Right.
What does that, so can we have that as a starting point? So for Matt, what does validation mean for you, I guess? And
well, yeah. So I think for me, when I talk about validation, and I hope we're on the same page here. It's about validating a child's experiences and emotions. So recognizing the difficulty they're facing at some point. So as we've talked about throughout this series, a lot of times when you see this behavior, there is a reason why it's happening. Doesn't excuse the behavior, but it gives us an idea of why it's happening. And it normally comes back to a difficulty that a child or young person is facing. So when I talk about validation, it's about looking at that difficulty and validating that for a child. So making their experience and their feelings valid.
So we're kind of saying, I can see you are really frustrated by this, and kind of fair enough. I would be feeling frustrated as well.
Exactly.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I did exactly the same thing then, Helen. I went off on a long one. Thanks for bringing me back in. But yeah, it's about saying, no, I can imagine this would make you really angry. And I get that. And it's a really simple thing to do that we overlook. I think a lot of us in our lives quite often.
But it's important, isn't it, that we validate because everybody needs to feel heard. And when we talk to parents about this relationship fracture that's happened, what's really important is people feel heard in their experience, and validating is part of that.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand what the word means in the first place, then we're just talking to 100 other people, but not the person in front of us, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's the act of feeling heard.
Yeah, or the act of making someone feel heard.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
If we're getting into that.
No. Helen, what's your sort of take on it? What would you...
I yes, absolutely agree that it is about saying, as I said, this. I think you must be feeling X, Y, Z at the moment. That's a completely normal feeling. I can understand you feeling like that.
Yeah.
So saying that it's about with quite young children as well. Often naming the emotions, helping them to understand what's going on in their body, in their environment,
because it helps them to process what's going on for them.
Yeah.
What was that program?
Often at a time when it's overwhelming, So sorry, go on, Jane.
No, it's okay. It's just this. I don't know whether this is helpful or not, but there was a program. Is catchphrase? Say what you see.
Yeah.
It's almost saying what you see. I can see that you're really angry. I can see you're upset. I can see that you're struggling. You're saying what you're seeing to help notice what's happening for somebody. And I think that one of the parents fairly recently that we spoke to say, they started to say to their child what they saw, and it almost took their child aback.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're noticing me?
And that's one of the big things, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would just put a little bit of a caveat, add a little extra to it. Just with some children, we do need to be really careful with the language you use around it. So I can see you are, or you must be, can be triggering for children or anyone really, because sometimes it feels as though they're being told what they feel or being told how they should feel. Again, we don't want to do that. But so most times it's fine to do that. But sometimes you do have to think about that, whether it might be better to say, it looks as though.
Yeah.
Or,
it seems like
exactly. Or I can imagine, so you're not being like, this is how you feel, this is what's going on.
Or saying things like, in your situation, I might be feeling.
Yeah.
Would that work?
I would avoid doing that.
Yeah.
Personally. I mean, I think situation to situation, you've got to judge it. But I, as much as possible, would refrain from bringing yourself into it. When I say yourself, I mean the adult in the situation. I would feel like this.
Because that's kind of telling them maybe again how they ought to be feeling.
Exactly, yeah. I think and it also communicates just in a really subtle way that the attention isn't fully on the child in some way. And I think when you're validating and you're trying to look at their experience, you know, you do it just to let that young person or child know that you see what's going on for them, and it kind of makes sense that they're struggling.
You're trying to be present and notice.
Yeah,
and that's important for your child to hear and see that.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think it's about trying to keep it simple, but being mindful that if you put a feeling or a thought into what somebody's trying to express, that can be really tricky for them. So it's like, say, thinking about the language you use, but keeping it simple. It seems like you're really angry.
Yeah.
You know, and if that escalates the situation, then just pause that moment.
And I think it's really important as well, following on from what you said there, is when you are going to use validation in this way, the way we're talking about it, is not being afraid to leave space. You know, say what you can see, and then sometimes I think we kind of fill space a lot. I know I do it an awful lot, but say what you're seeing. Your catchphrase moment again there, Jane, and then leave the space. See how that's
and keep it really small.
Tolerated.
One sentence is enough, isn't it? We don't have to have a whole narrative.
No.
And I think sometimes that's parents, you know, we fall into that trap of, I've got to try and say something for the scale. I want to talk to them. And actually, sometimes less can be more.
Definitely.
Particularly if a child is really struggling with big emotions at the time, I think we need to say something and then stop, because they've got to process that one sentence before they can hear anything else.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if they've got big emotions, they're not going to be able to hear a lot of stuff anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's respectful to, like you say, if they've got big emotions at that moment, you're letting them process it in the way and at the time that works for them. You know, you're not there waiting for a response from them, because that would be, again, coming from your needs. I need an answer now. When I always say to parents, you know, you're not using validation to necessarily have a conversation around it or try and work out the problem in it. You know, in that moment, you're doing it to let your child know that, as Jane, you said earlier on, that you're paying attention, you see what's going on for them, and you recognise the difficulty and they could, basically you put that, you give that out to your child or young person, and then it's up to them if they want to talk with you more about it, then they have the control over that. If they don't, fair enough, but they know that you recognise and have understood the difficulty they're facing, and it's valid. As we say, validation. It's okay to feel angry about that. That's understandable.
Their experience and their experience is valid.
Yeah.
Like, say, we could break the word down from validation to valid. It's their experience is valid. And thinking of words and professionalizing the language. Another word that's come up quite a lot is transition. What do we mean by transitions? So a lot of parents have asked us, you know, and parents do talk to us about transitions are really difficult. So what actually do we mean by that term, transition? Who wants to take this on?
Yeah, so I guess transitions is normally we're talking about the change from one activity to another, from one space to another. It's kind of just about a change in what's going on for that child. So it might be having to finish a task that they're enjoying, and start doing something that maybe they don't want to do so much.
Yeah.
It's about coming off the Xbox and getting ready for bed. It might be coming inside from being outside.
I think you put it really nicely there, Matt, actually. It's coming from one activity potentially to another activity. And I think sometimes those transitions can be difficult if it's an activity, a child or young person is really enjoying and getting a lot out of, and they're being asked to do something that maybe they're not happy about doing. So an example, as you just gave, coming off your Xbox because it's time to go to bed. We could consider that a difficult transition. Or a younger child potentially that coming from waking up in the morning, getting dressed is a transition. Coming down to breakfast can be a transition. Putting on their clothes or they're cleaning their teeth to go to school can be a transition. It's the act from going from one thing to the next, isn't it?
And where that potentially becomes an issue is the changing expectations. So
Yes.
when we transition from one activity or one space to another, there are different expectations placed upon us about what we should be doing at that moment.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes, we come back to, we've talked about it a few times, but expectation can often be the cause of friction and difficulty.
We've talked about small things there, haven't we? But we also use the term transition to mean big things, whether that's going from primary school to secondary school.
Yeah.
Perhaps
one home to another home.
Moving house, one home to another home. That's what I was thinking, yeah. So it can be little things, lots of levels, the kind of micro level that we've been talking about, or maybe the coming home from school, going to school, those are kind of medium ones perhaps, and then the really big ones like changes of school, changes of home as well.
Yeah. But changes of parents, if you've got parents that are no longer living together, that transition from one home with one parent with potentially different rules and expectations into another home with another parent with potentially different rules and expectations. So, like say, bigger transitions as well.
Yeah. And all this stuff, there can be confusion around it at times or a difficulty adjusting. It takes a little time to adjust yourself to the new expectation or the new way of thinking or being. Just in a really basic way, there could just be a lot of, as you said, as we spoke about at the beginning, can be disappointment around, I'm going from this thing that I really like to this thing that I don't. And I think sometimes there's an idea of, but you've just got to do it. Yeah, okay, it's tough, but you've got to do it. And that is true. And there is important lessons to learn around that sometimes we've got to do things we don't like. And that is life. But we can still recognize, again, linking it back to the validation, we can still recognize that actually that is really frustrating. Or that is, making you a little bit unhappy.
But I think also sometimes as a parent, we get so busy in trying to get from one activity maybe to another activity, or doing, we're often multitasking and doing a lot of things. So sometimes it can be a bit like, come on, we've got to go and do this. Come on, no, you got to come and do that. And sometimes we can forget that actually that can be difficult.
Yeah.
So it's kind of holding in mind, okay, hold on a second. I know that this could be something that's a bit tricky. I need to just pause a moment, going back to pausing, validate, go back to validation, validate, and acknowledging that it is tricky.
I think in our heads as well, if we're the adult in the situation, we've thought about, in 5 minutes I'm going to do this, this is what we need to do next. So you've done the kind of prep, but we're sometimes asking children to make those changes without doing the prep, aren't we?
Yeah.
So it's then, there are all sorts of techniques that perhaps we don't want to go into now because of time, but things that parents can do to help children make those changes in a less difficult way.
I don't think it's a bad idea to go into them very quickly. I know that my daughter downloaded an app on her phone that I remember a parent was telling me about, and she's got all these little alarm sounds that come up on her phone that tell her she has to go from one thing to the next, and it's so helpful to get her ready for school.
Yeah, egg timers.
Yeah,
can be your friend.
Visual charts. So a child, particularly a younger child, is more involved in that activity change.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Helen, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just thought
no, not at all.
We can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, and things like sitting down with children for that last bit and talking about the game that they're doing and sitting with them while they finish the game before they stop, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Is another useful one that people mention quite a lot.
Because then you're supporting through the transition. You're there to support that child through And again, it maybe seems a little bit over the top. You know, we're not. This isn't they're not scaling Everest here. You know, this isn't the hardest thing ever. But there is a moment that can be a flashpoint, and it can be a tricky moment. So looking to support your child through any of those slightly difficult moments, if you can, and sitting with them for the end bit and going, right, you know, it's connecting as well. If you sit with your child and you I guess interact with them in the end of one activity, you have just connected, so that you've got a much better chance of helping them deal with the difficulty they're about to face, because they're going to feel more connected and more likely to be cooperative, really.
Okay, so moving us on a little bit, there's a couple of more ones just thought it'd be really helpful to touch base on whilst we're doing this particular episode. And again, something that a parent spoke about is boundaries and rules. What are the differences?
Well, do you know what? I'm going to bounce that one right back at you, Jane, because I know this is one that you are, you know, it's quite important to you, thinking about the definition between the two.
Yeah. And I think for me, and I can't say that this is, you know, this is only what I speak about when I think about boundaries and rules and talk to other professionals about. A boundary is something that keeps us safe. So for me, when I think about boundaries, they're the bigger things that are around us to keep us all safe, whether that's if my house was, you know, under threat of being burgled, then I would be able to call the police, who would come and keep that safe, and then keep a boundary of who can come into my house and who can't. If I walk out of my house and somebody decides they want to get in my car, well, actually there's a boundary in society that stops that from happening. So those boundaries keep us all safe. And it's helpful for us to understand what those boundaries are as best we can, because they keep us all safe. And we all have boundaries in our home that keep us safe. A rule, and what we talk to parents about, a rule is often something put into place to elicit a response from it. So a rule could be, I want to set a rule that you have to be home by 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So is that a boundary because it keeps us safe coming home at 10 o'clock? Or are you putting that rule into place to come in at 10 o'clock because then you know what's happening and you want your child to do something? And I think it's about, I don't know whether I've muddied the waters, but a rule is often something, particularly when an adolescent is, you know, looking to sort of withdraw from parents, because that's normal, you know, teenage development, is we're trying to be a bit more independent, come away from the rules that our parents set down for us.
Yeah.
Part of that is kind of pushing against that a little bit, isn't it? But so for some young people, and particularly where there's challenging behaviour and the communication isn't, you know, as positive as we'd like it to be, I'm going to break that rule, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And the boundary would be, well, actually, it's now 12 o'clock and you're not home, so you're therefore not safe anymore.
Yeah.
So I now have to do something about that, rightly so. So
it seems like, so the boundaries, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the boundaries are more about the non-negotiables around safety, and the rules are around, I guess, helping your child to learn about a way of behaving in society that's just a more positive way. Is that?
And we all have rules in our family. So yeah, I mean,
right,
yes, I think so. But I think that with the addition that we all have different rules within our homes.
Yeah.
And there is an element of those rules keeping us safe. However, they're rules that are and can be negotiated, as you just rightly said. So actually, do I have to be home at 10 o'clock? Or can I be home at 11 o'clock? Okay, let's negotiate that rule.
Yeah, or if you get in at 10 past 10 and it's like, you know, I said you had to be in by 10, you're late.
Yeah.
You know, it's...
And what we find is that people are often told to put in a family agreement which has lots of rules on it. And those rules will often be broken. So it's thinking about, okay, hold on a second. What do we mean by a rule and what do we mean by a boundary? A boundary, for example, could be hitting in the home in a violent manner towards a parent or a sibling is not safe behavior. So maybe the boundary should be, in order to keep everybody safe in the home, there should no longer be any physical violence. That's a hypothetical boundary that some parents choose to put into place. And that is about keeping people safe. So what's the rules that are there to be negotiated, to be discussed with your child?
Yeah.
Which feels very different from a boundary, which is about safety. And that's why we talk about it in what's a rule that can be negotiated, and often rules are put into place because we want somebody to do something. Whereas a boundary is more of a societal sort of keeping us safe.
No, I think
I've muddied it. But it'd be interesting to see what people feel about it.
I think that talking there about we don't hit each other in this house as a boundary, I think that helped me to understand the distinction you were making there. But I'd be interested if you had a sense of how, is there a rule that then helps that boundary be enforced? Or
well, for me, I wouldn't necessarily suggest a rule because the rule will be broken. So it's more saying, listen, in order for us to be safe, there can't be violence in the house. Because as soon as there's violence in the house, nobody is safe. And that's just the boundaries. That it's the same as you would have that boundary in a school, you would have that boundary out in anywhere. You can't just go up to anybody and hit them. There's boundaries that keep us all safe. Whereas a rule in the home is not necessarily about, not hitting, because that's a boundary. But the rules are things like, again, you need to come in at this time. You need to come off your Xbox at that time. You need to go to school. You need to go and put you need to do your homework. They're more familial rules that we put into place that are more individual to each family. And I'm hesitant to talk to families about family agreements because inevitably a family agreement will be a list of rules and they are likely to be broken.
I think the part of the trouble with those two words is that everybody's got different ways that they've used them in the past, isn't there? And I'm just thinking you could throw expectations into the mix as well. Yeah. And in some houses, people might saying these are rather than rules, they might be talking about expectations that you come off your Xbox at such and such a time. So it's kind of, we're all going to be using those words in slightly different ways, but we can kind of see there's a difference between. Yeah, I like your thing about boundaries of keeping safe. I'm thinking about fences around a field. You can move. There's lots of place to move in that field. You can do all sorts of things. You can have a party. You can do all that, but there's a fence around the edge.
Cannot go beyond it.
Yeah,
that keep the sheep safe, if you like.
Yeah.
I guess it's a way that people use it in just common language. It's just thinking about picking their battles as well. So thinking of like, is this something that, in terms of, is this a rule? Is this something that you can, is this absolutely, like you say, a boundary that is non-negotiable where there's nothing you can do about it? This is just not going to be accepted. Or is it about something where you go, do you know what? Okay, we can, like you were saying, you can have some back and forth over it, some dialogue and maybe some negotiation. So, people often talk about picking their battles, don't they? And I think, is that it?
See, I think that was a really nice summation of it, Matt. And you passed it back over to me. And I think you just gave a really nice summation of it. And I think when it comes to language and words, it's also thinking about, well, what is important to you? It's no good listening to somebody trying to tell you something if it doesn't make sense to you. It's about working and communicating with the person that is maybe trying to support you about what is working for you and what language you understand.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's what's really important.
Yeah, definitely. I always try as much as possible. I know I fail, but I try to talk in as clear English. English. I think I'm just giving myself away there. I'm not able to do it. But it is important because we're talking about people's lives, people's most important relationships. They don't want to hear us talking about in language that they don't sort of connect to. This is about this is as real as it gets. You know, when you're talking about a relationship between a parent and their child. So it's important that we definitely use language that seems people connect with. And also, I think you said use language that they feel comfortable with and makes sense to them, because end of the day, everyone is different, and we all have slightly different ways of communicating and different ways of using language. And the families that we are supporting, they are the experts in their own family. They know what works for them. They know what is actually happening in their lives. So we can support them with that, but they know what's really going on there. So it's important that we use their language.
But I also think, it ties in really nicely with the fact what we're talking about here is a parent-child relationship and communication. And we often refer to this behavior being a breakdown in communication. So the words we use do actually become really, really important, and the language we understand becomes important. I mean, I've got, a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old who will turn around to me and say, "What are you talking about? What is that word? Nobody says that word anymore." So actually understanding language in families is really important, and the terms that we choose to use. So it's finding that commonality that you have, that you can create within your family, that you can understand, because otherwise there's that miscommunication before you've even started.
Yeah.
And we're trying to kind of create a more open communication. So that becomes becoming more open to what we mean about the language that we're using.
Something that we talk about a lot is de-escalation. What do we mean by de-escalation?
It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because it's so much on the news, isn't it? About different nations saying, we don't want to escalate this, we want to de-escalate this, we want you to not get involved. And it feels like, and I want to shout at the radio and say, well, why did you do that then?
Yeah.
If you're serious, you can't just say to the other nation, we don't want you to escalate this. If we're talking about de-escalation, there's a responsibility on us as well. And we can only control what we do. We can never control what the other person does. But
can influence
we
them.
can make change. We can make changes in the way we behave, which can impact on the situation and on the other person. Yeah. So if we're saying we want a situation not to get out of hand, if we want it to de-escalate, then it's on us to start that process.
Yeah.
And the thing that comes to mind is the whole thing about, well, there are some, don't argue. Why are we arguing with a child? Why is it so important to us that we win this discussion? Why is it so important to us that we're right?
Can I just jump in with something? When you were talking about listening to the radio and, different countries or nations saying, we want to de-escalate the situation, but that they're doing that by dominance, by trying to dominate with force, and as a hope to de-escalate. And I think that's links to what you were just saying there. Arguing, we have to be right. We have to make sure we get the last word, and be the one to say this is, I am in control here and dominating the situation. And one person trying to dominate another will often not lead to a de-escalation. It will escalate.
I'm just going to throw in there as well that, so you're faced with your child, however old they may be, and they are shouting and screaming at you. You can say that's an escalation in their behavior, because they're shouting and screaming. So what we're looking for, and what parents often ask us, is how do I stop them from shouting, screaming, or throwing things around, or threatening me? I can't communicate with my child at that time. How do I stop it? And that's what we mean by de-escalation. It's the reducing that real venomous feeling behavior that can feel really, really scary and fearful. And how do I stop that and de-escalate it so it's, everything's calmed again. And I think that for me is what I mean by de-escalation, that kind of takedown, which is what we're all saying.
Yeah.
And it's a really difficult one. You know, lots of parents ask us about de-escalation techniques. It's very tricky because each child is different, and each you know, circumstances is different.
Yeah, it is tricky. And you're right, you know, it's always different, but I think there are some things to keep in mind, and it's always useful to have some basic guidelines in your head, because as behavior escalates, you will be most likely triggered yourself. It becomes very hard to stay calm. You know, it's something that, okay, just stay calm, don't do. Well, you know, when someone's using this behavior around you, that becomes almost impossible. So
two things very sorry, Matt. Yeah. Two things very quickly come to mind. The first one is Dr. Annie Clements, who says, and her quote is, "Nobody ever calmed down by being told to calm down."
Yep.
And the second one is Victoria Baker's research, where a young person is like, if I'm asked to count down from 10 one more time, I'm just going to lose it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be mindful of the techniques we talk to parents about, because actually sometimes they just become they hear it all the time and it becomes a little bit desensitized to it.
Yeah. Can I say something about that counting down from 10?
Yes. Yes.
You know, when you're in a moment, if escalation has already happened and that young person is in a heightened emotional state, and you try and get them to calm down by asking them to do something or getting them to think about something in terms of count backwards from 10 or whatever it might be, you run the risk of further escalation by asking them to do something in the first place, by placing a demand on them. You're potentially asking them to use rational thought at a time when they're not able to use rational thought because of what's going on in their brain. You know, where they're coming from, what's dominant. Are they coming from their thinking part of themselves, or are they coming from the emotional part of themselves? So trying to think about some of those strategies, when we've already flipped our lid, trying to then go, right, now let's think sensibly about this. Count backwards from 10. You know, that person isn't able to put that into place at that moment. So sometimes it's about using those strategies before you get to that stage where the person has gone.
Yeah. We also try to come away from counting down from 10, because what happens traditionally, when you do a countdown from 10, what happens when you get to 1? There's an explosion.
You've run out of road, haven't you?
You've run out of road, or something's about to happen. 10, 9, 3, 2, 1, ba-doom. So we try to avoid that, don't we? But Matt, I'm going to pick you up again on your jargon.
Oh, okay.
Just thrown in, flip your lid.
Flip your lid, right. Okay.
So you're going to, quick explanation of that.
Yeah, so flip your lid. I mean, I think a lot of us have used it in a kind of, I don't know, a colloquial kind of term. So just kind of speaking normally, just going, oh, he's flipped his lid, he's gone, he's lost it. But when we use it, we're talking about that. But it's in terms of what happens in your brain when you get to that point of emotional dysregulation, where essentially the thinking part of your brain is no longer in control of you. So it's as though this part of your brain has just flipped open, and I'm not doing a very good job of this. Of describing it, but look it up online.
I think you need to have the hands. You need to have the visuals to really understand. To really be able to explain.
I'm doing the visuals.
I'm sure
no one can see.
Well, it's that disconnection, isn't it, between the rational brain and the thinking brain? It's that the emotional brain.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
That disconnection between the two. So actually, it's what you went back to by saying, you can't ask somebody to calm down because they're not connected to the part of the brain that can make rational decisions. Yeah. As you rightly said, if you simply Google flip your lid, there's some brilliant little videos out there will help you explain it.
Yeah, I was shown one on TikTok the other day, and it was about 20 or 30 seconds, and just explained it really simply. So it's not hard to get it explained, but it's really useful for adults, parents, carers to be watching to watch some of those videos, get their heads around it, but also to show to young people as well. Because as I said at the beginning, sometimes you have a young person who responds in a way that, once they have calmed down, once they've gone back down from being at 100, they've brought themselves back down to a kind of more settled place. They will kind of think, what happened there? They will have acted in ways that they can't fully understand why they just responded like that. And I think watching some of those flip your lid videos and thinking more about it, starting to understand, right, this is something that's going on inside my brain. It's not me just being a bad person. At some points there's something as triggered. Bringing back to the triggers as well, and thinking about trauma, something gets triggered inside the brain, and you flipped your lid, and there's not always a lot you can do about it.
I think one of the things that's really coming to mind while we're talking about de-escalation, because I've got in my head, I've got a whole series of things like, oh, you could do that, but how it has to be so much decided by each individual family, because some things might work really well for some families, but totally not for another family.
100%.
And so the kind of things that the first things that you think of when you've got a young child, particularly as well, the whole distraction thing is a really big one that people talk about, I think, for young children, which could work really well, or it could just have no impact at all. But also, if you tried that with an older child, they might be thinking, well, you're complete, excuse me, what I need some attention here. You've just gone off to make a cup of tea. You're saying, I need a bit of space. I need to go and make myself a cup of tea. That could actually inflame the situation more for some children. Or you could say, do you know what? I think we all need a cup of hot chocolate now, and let's restart today and try and do things all over again. That may well work brilliantly for other families. So it has to be we have a role perhaps in helping families think through what might work, but ultimately we can't say this is the thing that you do here at this point.
I think that's why we purposely have set up the bespoke work that we do, Helen, is recognising that each family is individual, and not all techniques, not all strategies, not all suggestions is going to work for each family, but it's amending them. It's kind of being flexible within a strategy, flexible within an idea. But you've also just reminded me, there's so much for us to talk about in another series. So many that you've very nice link into that, Helen, but definitely mindful that we're coming up to the end of our first series of podcasts, which has just been really lovely to connect with both of you and think about what we're talking about and kind of put it out there, if you like. But also thinking about, wow, where's a second series going to take us? There's so many ideas and so many things for us to continue to discuss, whether it's individual strategies or, bringing other people into our conversations. It's an exciting sort of proposition, I think.
Definitely.
There is a lot more to talk about in terms of all of this. I'm looking forward to doing it.
We need our cliffhanger now, don't we?
I think that's it.
Special guests coming.
Stay
maybe.
tuned.